Good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, I'm going to interview a very, very fine gentleman from the great state of Massachusetts. His name is Bill Cimbrelo. Bill came onto our show several different times with Dr. Joe Firestone. And I'll be honest with you, this guy has climbed up very, very high in my esteem. Some of the things that he's been talking about, some of the things that he's advancing are things that you've seen Real Progressives fight for 3 years to get into the public conscious. So I'm very excited to bring Bill on. Obviously, his election is coming up here in short order, and we wanted to be able to give him an opportunity to tell his side of the story and give you an idea of what exactly it is that he stands for and his campaign is for. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on my friend, Bill Cimbrelo. Welcome, sir. How are you tonight?
Thank you. I'm well. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate this opportunity here as we're in the final throngs of this race against an establishment corporate Democrat with very different ideals.
Certainly. So let me just start this real quickly. You know, for us at Real Progressives, you know, we're nonpartisan and we support progressive values wherever they find themselves. And the curiosity for us here at Real Progressives is when folks start really understanding not only how the monetary system works because of the incredible opportunity it avails us, but also when people are bold and unabashedly willing to go into the public space and take a stand for these things. And I've seen you do that in several places, Twitter not the least of which. But I know that you've had a couple opportunities to go out there and really, you know, lay this out for people to start dreaming a bigger dream. Would you take just a moment, talk a little bit about what your campaign stands for and some of those opportunities where you've been able to take a bold stand to represent the progressive values and the idea of a New Deal, if you will?
Sure. Glad to do that. You know, we talk about the New Deal, you call it the New Deal 2.0, and really the New Deal is the old deal, right? We're just trying to bring back the old deal and resuscitate it to fit today's parameters. And we've got those basic needs that are not being met today in society. We've got healthcare that is not being met and not affordable for far too many people. I've termed healthcare a right. Neither of my opponents have labeled it as such, and it is the way I see it. It is the way the majority of Americans see it, and I also have termed housing as a right, and affordable housing as a right, and I also think that we ought to be properly fed with nutritional food, not junk food. And I also believe that we should have a free and equal education for everyone in the country that wants it. And that includes free college and or vocational training. We have a big gap that's growing every year in with the lack of enough vocational or blue collar workers, if you will. So these are basically the broad parameters. We need to have an infrastructure that works for all of us to be able to commute and commute in a way that doesn't inhibit us or harm us, and a green energy platform that doesn't subsidize the fossil fuel industry, but instead empowers homeowners with incentivizing them with a tax structure that promotes renewable energy both at home. I've been an outspoken supporter of locally here of a project here which put the largest offshore wind turbines here in off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, Cape Cod here with Vineyard Wind, and pretty excited to see that happening, and New Bedford is benefiting from that tremendously. So we just need to keep moving along those lines and keep moving this country away from our dependency on fossil fuels. And the other thing that I have proposed, and I haven't heard anyone else talk about, but people seem to like it, is my federal wage gap guarantee. which is a geo-indexed minimum wage, which is a living wage, not a poverty wage. People talk about a $15 minimum wage like it's the be all and end all. In fact, in Massachusetts, it's still a poverty wage. In Massachusetts, the living wage calculates out to, by my calculations, a little bit over $19 an hour. And we're currently at $11 an hour here, minimum wage in Massachusetts. And California, that works out to about $21 an hour. So with my geo-targeted minimum wage concept, it does not in any way hurt small business employers, because that gap between where the minimum wage is and where the geo-targeted amount needs to be is 100% funded by the federal government, and all the fees associated with that, for example, the Social Security matching, state unemployment insurance, workers' comp insurance, all those extra fees would be also handled by the government. But the net result is that you have now people working not at a poverty wage, but at a true living wage that coincides with what they need to be earning in their part of the country. And just think about the millions of dollars that will circulate back into the economy, helping small and large businesses all over the land. And I'm pretty excited about that. And of course, it's no surprise that modern monetary theory plays a huge role in making that happen. And the worst part about modern monetary theory for me is the theory part. I hate the fact that it's called a theory, because as we all know that we talk about this, it's not a theory, it's the way it is. And I have been talking about that at every opportunity. Recently, I was interviewed at by the editorial staff of the Standard Times here in New Bedford. We're still anxiously awaiting their publication. But of course, it came up when they looked at my platform. They said, "This is great. How are you going to pay for it?" And we went into the process of MMT not calling it by name until the end, until they really pushed the issue.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. We can title this different things. I mean, there's folks out there that simply call it modern money. There's other folks that call it monetary sovereignty. There's a lot of different ways of stating the same thing. The idea of theory was actually in a Bill Mitchell Billy blog, where some commenter dubbed it modern monetary theory. And as Kelton says, there's really nothing modern about it, and there's very little that's theoretical. Modern monetary theory dates further back than economics. It's really just an operations manual for how a free-floating sovereign fiat currency works, like step-by-step tracing through the balance sheet. So you are on the right track, my friend. Right. I want to ask you a question, because obviously different parts of this country have different needs. And as you go into Congress, Congress is the holder of the purse strings, as they say. Article 1, Section 8 grants the Congress the ability to basically pay for things, okay? And what I'm wondering is, with so few people understanding how the monetary system works, being steeped in the belief that we've got to either raise taxes to pay for things or cut spending over here to pay for things, it's always a rob Peter to pay Paul kind of scenario. How would you, on the floor of the House of Representatives, be able to defend bold, progressive stances like what you're taking? With somebody's got to be the Harlequin, as J.D. Alt says. How would you go about doing such a thing? I mean, would it be a stealth under the, or would it be a straightforward? How do you think would be best to take something like that were you to get elected?
Well, I think one thing that's fortunate is I'm not the only one at this stage of the game that's out there carrying the modern monetary theory torch, if you will. People like Tim Conover are out there, and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez speaks about it openly and has that on her website. I believe she has a link. How are you going to pay for it? I think it's even called. No. So we're building this beachhead of progressives that get it, if you will. And the way to do that is to get enough of us in there. I've even talked about doing a offsite huddle before we even get sworn in, just to talk about how we're going to strategize, not only that, but also how are we going to get leadership roles inside committees, because being freshmen and being progressives, we expect the worst and have to be able to be prepared to be able to deal with that in a way that's going to work for our constituents. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't want to get into Congress and be stuck in a corner somewhere. Oh, don't talk to those progressives, because that would be a nightmare. And so, again, if we work together and work together as a slate and a voting bloc, we can bring a lot of power to our constituents and to the agenda that's the progressive agenda that we're trying to promote. So in terms of the how, I think a lot more of those people that are sitting in there get it than are letting us to believe. Because if you look at, how do you cut 1.5 trillion in taxes to the richest Americans and then turn around in the same breath practically and drop $717 billion on the military industrial complex, and they say, oh, no problem, we can handle it. It's because we can. And there are elements there, surprise. There are elements there that know that. They've known it all along. And I've even seen some stuff out there now where there's a kind of a joke cartoon of showing Speaker Ryan saying, we were gonna cut Social Security, but now they know about MMT, so oh well, he sort of resigned. So it is, the message is getting out there. It's a slow process, and I think we just have to hold people to task. And I'm hopeful if we get, I'll tell you this, if we get nicked in this editorial review in New Bedford over the how we're going to pay for it answer, I may reach out to Stephanie Kelton and have her write an op-ed and say, what are you talking about? Because that's the way, we need those forces, right? We need everybody working together to make sure that people don't pull the wool over everyone's eyes the way they've been doing it all along here for decades.
That's right. One of the things that's exciting to me is, as I look at your platform, and we're going to go through that here in a little bit, but as I look through your platform, I realize, quite frankly, that, take the politics out of this for just a second. If you just talk to the average man and woman, Republican, Democrat, Green, you name it, we all largely want to see each other and our children do better. And when you look, there's only a handful of real major objections that, I'm not talking about the fringe, I'm talking about the average rank and file voter would really object to. You look over at the Republicans, many of them just simply have stopped believing that government can be effective, largely because it's been orchestrated that way. But many of them are saying, hey, I just don't want my tax dollar going to your bad choices. That's the Republican stance, right? If they thought it was being done properly, they'd probably sign on. And you look at the Democrats, and they've been so conditioned to reducing the deficit that they don't quite understand how this could all be possible. But without it, there is no possibility for a New Deal. But with it, you might have a bigger coalition than you ever fathomed. There's just a lot of people out there that I believe these policies speak to, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on.
Yeah, you're absolutely. Oh, the video's delayed, or
it's okay. So let me ask you: when you look at folks like John McCain, who just recently passed, here's a man that, by all typical American measures from yesteryear and on, is a hero, served forever, blah blah blah. But as a progressive, we've got a lot of discontent within the ranks. A lot of people look at the things that were done, policies that he supported, so on and so forth. How does a up and coming progressive who's trying to win a congressional seat, how does he speak to his constituents about a guy like this? What is your take on John McCain, his service, and quite frankly, where we go from here as a nation when we look at people like John McCain?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. So I don't know if there's a delay here.
You're okay. Keep going. You're fine.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but so I actually, quite honestly, I'll be frank about it. I tweeted earlier today about John McCain, Senator McCain, and I was surprised at the amount of flack I got from fellow progressives because I didn't come out and call him a hero. All I said was that he was an icon, and that I came out and I said I rarely agreed with his politics, but the fact is that he was an icon in Congress, and he was a prisoner of war that was tortured and was in solitary confinement. And I think that, he died of brain cancer. And I think we need to respect that. I don't have a lot of respect, honestly, for the policies that he pushed our nation towards. And but I also didn't feel it was the time to really hammer that today. I just and people were upset with me for it, and I'm sorry if they feel that way, but I just don't feel that you ought to kick somebody when they've just passed away. I'm sorry.
I think you got a lot of class, Bill. I'd like to just say that up front. I think that's very classy stance. I appreciate that.
So at the end of the day, recently I just got, which I'm really proud of, I got endorsed by the Peace Action of Massachusetts over many of the other reps in the state of Massachusetts. That is something that I feel very honored to have received. We were endorsed by the Cape Cod Democratic Socialists of America. We were endorsed by the South Shore Green Rainbow Party. We've been endorsed by Tim Canova, and we've been endorsed by Sima Hernandez. So we're pretty excited about those endorsements and what they mean, and what those people signify and those organizations signify. So we're building a coalition here of those kinds of people, those kinds of beliefs, where my opponent, his coalition consists of Raytheon and the pharmaceutical companies and the fossil fuel industry. So we have a very different coalition that we're working with, and our campaign is grassroots. We have yet and we have no intention of ever taking a penny from corporate interests. So we're pretty proud of that, and we're down to the wire here, Steve. We're 7 days, 8 days. Well, after tonight, it'll be seven days to go before Tuesday's election, September 4th. Unfortunately, it's the day after Labor Day weekend, so I hope people remember to get up that morning to do that. And it's school start season, so it's a horrible time to be having an important primary such as this. But we're excited about the response we've been getting as we go door knocking and talking to people. And circling back to your point, the ideas and ideals that I'm talking about when I talk to business owners, at first they react just as you say. They're very reluctant. Oh, why am I going to, how are these things going to help me? But then we start talking about the velocity of money and the fact that business owners, what do they need? They need customers. Where are these customers going to come from? In most cases, they're going to come from community. So if they're going to come from the community has to have a disposable income to put money into it, right? Yeah. And that same disposable income then filters into the community chest, if you will, in the way of sales taxes, and that money just keeps circulating around and around. People have a problem that, in making the distinction between federal spending versus state taxes. Now, state taxes are, what goes in must come out kind of thing, pretty black and white. You run it like a regular balance sheet, unlike the federal government. And you have to make that distinction for people, because they keep coming back to how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? So when I explain these programs, and I try and explain to them that, no, we're not going to raise state taxes. In fact, these programs are going to circulate money back into the state for using, improving our roads, raising teacher salaries. In this case, we need a new bridge here crossing the Cape Cod Canal. We need to have an infrastructure that includes a new water deal for not just clean water, but also sewage systems. Millions of jobs that can be made, blue collar and white collar jobs. So when I start putting in those terms and I get this resistance, I said, so wait a minute. So you're okay when the government puts $7.17 billion into the private sector via the military industrial complex, and that money can circulate back. But when I tell you that we're going to put it into your neighborhood, and so people can actually earn a living, and that money circulates back into your neighborhood, do you have a problem with that? And then they kind of, you can sort of see the gears turning. They're a little reticent to say, well, okay, but you can start to see the process.
Absolutely. I want to touch on some things here real quickly, and I hope you'll forgive me. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. One of the big concerns that you see people that are not economically minded, who are morally minded, who have beliefs and ideas, but not necessarily routed in proper economics, they're always looking to cut something to pay for something. It's just in their brain, hey, I'd like to get HBO or whatever, but I got to cut Cinemax to be able to get it. That's the kind of mindset they have, when the federal government itself has no means or constraints really other than real resources. So one of the big concerns, obviously, is that as progressives, many of us would like to see the military-industrial complex neutered in terms of its spread around the world, in terms of the warmongering that we've seen out of quite a bit of both sides of the aisle, to be fair. Right. But there is a false perception that we have to cut the military in order to get health care, or we have to cut this to get that. And what I'm trying to understand is, how would you present this to folks when you realize that it's a simple algebraic equation? You pass a bill, the money is appropriated. You cut a bill, there's no money appropriated somewhere else just because you cut something. You actually have to pass a bill to cut, and you have to actually pass a bill to spend. So you're setting yourself up for a two-front war with these I got to cut to spend things, and they're completely unrelated. Right. But there's some messaging there because people are tied in with their heartfelt beliefs. Forget their hard-earned tax dollar. Their heartfelt beliefs tell them that we have to do these things because that's how their household works. But quite frankly, if you cut a lot of these things just arbitrarily, we could set ourselves up for a terrible recession without proper planning, because you're removing money from the economy. Once you do that, you're literally killing other jobs without a replacement. How would you talk to individuals that are under that faulty notion that in order for us to spend, we have to cut?
Right. So it gets back to the as you say, the faulty notion. I say, the federal government is not kitchen table economics, which is what you're referring to. I've got to cut back on groceries if I'm going to have my cable, and vice versa. So the unfortunate thing is, as a progressive and as someone that doesn't want to promote imperial expansion or wars in general, it used to be, before I understood MMT, honestly, it used to be a good excuse, right? We were coming out and saying, hey, look, we really don't want to spend on the military industrial complexes because we really want to spend on infrastructure, on renewable energy, and all the rest of it. And now, as a result of this, that argument is off the table. We can't use that as an excuse. The excuse for cutting back on the military industrial complex has to be a moral argument, right? We can't use that as our reason anymore. And I said that during this interview with the newspaper the other day, and they were perplexed because they don't expect a progressive to come out and say exactly that. They're expecting me to come out and say, hey, look, we got to slash military spending in order to get these programs, and that threw them completely. You could just see it in their face. So the separation of that is a huge issue, and it also helps really with the discussion at the door with somebody or when I meet somebody, because then they realize, even if they lean conservative, they're like the defense programs or whatever it is, when I tell them we don't have to do one or the other, we can do both, and as a country with a sovereign currency, we have the ability to do that. And I had somebody say to me, but what about the debt? What about the debt? And this person was older, sitting across from me. And I said, pardon me for asking, but are your parents alive? And he said, no. And I said, did anyone go after them for the debt after they died?
That's awesome.
And everyone laughed, right? And he said, no, of course not. He says, no, of course not. Nor will they ever, because that clock sitting in Wall Street is not the money you and I owe. It's the money the federal government has invested in us. And it's because that money is coming into the private sector that we're able to do the things that we can do. And every time Congress has fiddled with it and said, oh, we got to balance the budget, we got to balance the budget, that's when we go into a recession. And I said to him, look at history.
Dude, that's exactly right. So I want to give a story. I talked to Warren Mosler earlier tonight, as a matter of fact, and he was talking. He had made this point that, you know, individuals they don't quite get this story correct. You know, the government imposed a tax so it could provision itself, not so it could spend. So in order to pay your tax, you had to have the first tax dollar, which was the first dollar. So they had to spend, they had to give you money first so that you could pay it back to them. And the imposition of the tax created the first unemployed person, because before the government was submitting taxes, you were out there on your farm doing whatever, you were fishing, you were cooking.
Trading on corn cobs.
Yeah, whatever. And then once the government imposed a tax, what it did was, in order to get you to take its currency, it had to impose a tax payable only in its currency. Right. And, you know, some of this stuff becomes, you start realizing that what that national debt actually is the net money supply of all the untaxed dollars in existence. So we've got $21 trillion of untaxed dollars that are floating around there. If you pay off the debt, we have $0 in the economy. People don't understand this. It's a bit of a tough hill to climb, because they're just so used to the word debt. They're probably living paycheck to paycheck, or even worse. And so when they hear debt, it's very, very scary. So you've got your work cut out for you, that we all do, because this is a war for all of us. It's a war for our lives. What I want to know now, I think it's probably worth talking about. You know, we talk about infrastructure in this country, talk about how badly our bridges are. I think most of the bridges in this country are rated C or D. Take your life into your own hands as you're crossing it. We've got places like New Orleans with levees that have broken. And we've got all kinds of problems with fires all over the place. We should have ingenuity that could support some sort of an infrastructure to help out in California when these fires break out. There's just so much stuff out there that we could do to save not only lives, but with climate change fast, not only coming at us, but maybe even past us, we have to be able to deal with it now. We can't wait. So what do you think is a good way of selling infrastructure and recognizing how important a quality infrastructure is to support not only like nuclear power plants that are in existence near shorelines? With climate change, that could be a very, very dangerous thing. All we have to do is look at Japan to see what happens when these things are not tended to. Tell me a little bit about how you would position a infrastructure program.
Well, so, you know, the 9th District here in Massachusetts has the most coastline of any district in the state. So, you know, if you live here, you're tuned into what the ocean and ocean levels and weather are doing, because it affects us in some form or fashion in every way. both from a standpoint of a danger, and it's also a major vacationing community here, where we get an influx of about 500,000 people that come onto the Cape during the summertime to vacation here. So we have some unique things to the 9th District, and I've attended a number of seminars. One of them was hosted by 350.org, talking about ocean level rising and the impact, specifically seeing how literally some of the streets here on Cape Cod, for example, would actually disappear depending on how much our water table was to rise. So we have to use the resources that we have available to via the federal government to be able to take rapid action for addressing climate change. And you talk about infrastructure. One of the things I've talked about in the past is there's new technology out there now, which is able to do what's called carbon sequestration, which actually can grab CO2 out of the atmosphere. And it does that actively, and then it can be then created into a fuel product, and it can be done cost effectively. And Bill Gates is very interested in that. No one's talking about that, but it's a way to have create fuel that has a net zero footprint, net zero carbon footprint, I should clarify. So very exciting technology, but it's nothing new. It's really the marriage of two technologies. So there's so many things we can and should be doing to take on climate change. I've said from the beginning that I would co-sponsor Tulsi Gabbard's HR 3671, which is the Off Fossil Fuel Act. I almost think that that's gets us off fossil fuels by 2035. Is that fast enough? I don't think so. I think we need to do better, and I think we need to move faster. But it's a step in the right direction. And infrastructure-wise, again, we need to stop, putting CO2 into the atmosphere. We got Trump now trying to increase coal and cutting back on or I should say, making stack emissions more lax at a moment where we should be making them more stringent. Everything's going backwards with this administration. So a lot to be undone, once he's out of there, or at least neutralized. So again, infrastructure represents a tremendous opportunity. For me, infrastructure, I mean, we've got the electrical grid, we've got clean water, we've got wastewater treatment, we've got highways, we've got in France, they've got highways that have solar cells on the actual highway, which is really cool. As a test site. There's so many things. I get so aggravated when I see all these projects going on, and all we keep doing is putting back asphalt back on the highway. Let's put asphalt, new asphalt, new asphalt. Come on, guys, there's got to be something better than asphalt. So I'd like to see some innovation here, and I would certainly do everything in my power to promote innovation in every aspect.
I think that's great. So one of the other things I think that is vital here is, as you see individuals, we are all living paycheck to paycheck. You've got this gig economy going on out there. The government is even using contractors way past the point of what a contractor should be. Instead of hiring full-time equivalents, they're literally using these things so that they can get rid of people like that. There's a whole lot of hiring practices out there that leave people in a terribly insecure place. What is your stance on a federal job guarantee?
I support the federal job guarantee, but I also, I have my other program, which is the federal wage gap guarantee that I mentioned, that I think dovetails very nicely with that program, because the two together provide a real safety net there for again, we've got this regressive economic system that we know the statistics, what is it, 50% of the country has less than $400 in their savings account. So, yeah. I mean, that's atrocious. The richest country in the world, and we're talking, a ridiculous statistic like that. That's really scary. So the federal job guarantee is a great concept because it takes people that are either underemployed or unemployed, and it starts building a resume for them. It teaches them basics about getting them ready to work in the workforce, and it's a great step towards moving them out of being in a spot where they may feel where they don't have control over their lives, and empowering them. Right? That's what we want to do. We want to get people out of poverty, not create a business around poverty, but empower them to move out.
So I like that. I want to ask a question here. When it comes to economics, I think we could talk about that all night long because that's obviously my favorite subject on the planet. But I think there's some other important subjects that we need to touch on too. And I want to talk first off with election reform. And what I'm wondering is that just in the last couple of days, a lot of people, I'm not going to opine just yet, are celebrating this idea of reduced superdelegate power. In reading it, I'm not sure what the excitement is about. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on the recent, changes that came out of the DNC this past week.
Well, it sounded good on the surface, right? I think everyone sort of reacted in a positive way, but then it was like in the first pass is basically what it says is they won't use super delegates, but thereafter it's no holds barred again. So what are they really saying? It seems like they were just trying to be accommodating. So.
Here, I want to show you a tweet real quick. This is kind of humorous, actually. This is from Donna Brazil. She says, Democrats voted to remove automatic delegates from the first round of voting, but we still have seats at the table. We are still in the room and very much capable of setting the menu. Yeah. she didn't even hide it. She just straight up.
No. So, I mean, it's just camouflaged control, corporate control, and it's unfortunate. And again, I would do everything in my power to completely erase the superdelegates, given that opportunity. You mentioned campaign finance reform. I have on the website probably one of the more detailed planks that I have, and it's for anyone that's hasn't seen the website. I apologize. It's undergoing some revamping here, even though we're in the last few days here. But a lot more detail that needs to be put up. But as far as campaign finance reform goes, I have a public finance option, which works out to be $1.43 per $1,000 of taxes paid, and that's only by those that are paying taxes now. So anyone that isn't paying taxes now because of their particular tax bracket, they're not going to be having to pay that. But it works out to $1.43 per 1,000, and it's enough money to finance all these races every 2 years that need to be financed. It just works out really well.
I think that's neat. Let me ask you another question. Obviously, they're talking about trying to open up the primaries to allow non-party affiliated voters to be able to vote in these primaries. What is your thoughts on opening the primaries so that people are not stuck? I'm registered Republican, but I don't want to vote Republican. I'd like to vote for this guy, or whatever. What is your stance on opening up the primaries?
I'm definitely for opening the primaries. Here in Massachusetts, we're fortunate that we have open primaries. Basically, if you walk into the election booth here, you would, if you're unenrolled, you can walk in and decide once you're in front and you tell them what street you live in. They ask you what ballot you want, whether you want Republican or Democrat. You go and exercise your right to vote. When you come out of the voting booth, they put it in the counter. And by the way, we have paper ballots here in Massachusetts, which is another thing I'm happy about. And then after you vote, they ask you if you want to stay registered the way you did, or you want to basically be unenrolled again. So if you're unenrolled, you have the ability to vote for any party during the primary process here. We are an open primary, but if you are enrolled with a specific party, no, you can't.
Okay,
but
so
I would promote open primaries.
I watched, with great interest as I see, beyond the primary system in the actual general elections, third party access and so forth. And obviously, part of the great two parties, Republicans and Democrats, have a vested interest, I guess, to keep that out. But on the same hand, though, there has got to be some value in having these external parties force the narrative to change the conversation, because right now, if you look back, it was like a ping pong game, and you could play a drinking game or whatever for all the silly nonsense back and forth. I feel like Americans need more choice. I feel like we need more access to our system of government, more representation, more voice, more everything. But ultimately, right now, it would require Democrats and Republicans to give up power for these folks to gain some voice. Right. How would something like that take place? Do you support that? What is your stance on that, in a general, beyond the primaries?
Right. So, historically, as we watch, that people get elected, oftentimes they talk about, that they're going to change this, that, and the other. And once they're there, all of a sudden, Citizens United, the idea of getting rid of Citizens United seemed like a great idea while they were running as the outsider candidate. But once they get there, they all of a sudden they say, hey, this Citizens United isn't so bad. Look at the checks I'm getting. So, there's this really, dark energy that's taking over with people once they get in there. And again, it gets back to what we talked about earlier, having a slate of true progressives that are able to promote policies that are going to advance the notion that we need a government that is responsive to the people. Doesn't matter if they want to have a D or an R next to their name. Let's have policies, a national agenda and an international agenda that represents the people's interests. And you're not going to get that as long as we have the duopoly and I have a problem. Obviously, it's one of the main reasons I'm running in this race, because I feel that corporate interests outweigh all other interests in the way Congress and our government is being run at this time. And it is a big part of my platform is to strip that corporate interest out of the process, and if in any way possible, either repeal Citizens United, or my campaign finance objective that I talked about earlier actually sets up some competition against it. Because if you do that, if you take my campaign finance that I referred to, you agree to not take any other corporate monies. So there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. If we just have to work together to make it happen.
Sure. So one of the things that I think is important also is we talk about some social issues. I see a blowing up. I mean, the autistic community in America is just blowing up. I mean, it's just growing. It's the fastest growing, subset of individuals. And obviously, this is something that should be of some concern as to why autism is kicking in like this. But more importantly, though, there's an incredible amount of care that has to go into taking care of both children and adults who are autistic. I'm interested in understanding, I don't feel like there's enough information out there for people to really grab hold of. I don't feel like it's well known enough for people to really understand. But as a father with an autistic child, this is one of the most important issues I've ever faced in my life. What is your perspective? If one of your constituents came up to you and said, look, my son has got autism, help us get the services we need, help us get help in our home. I got to tell you, I go to work, 2 hours sleep, bouncing from therapy to therapy. Employers don't want to hear that you've got to take care of that kid. And you look around at the services that are available and the protections that are available, and it's non-existent. I mean, in talking to our state here, I'm in Pennsylvania, in talking to our the early intervention folks, they're saying the key thing here is they don't have access to funds. And there's a lot of people that just laugh and don't understand the subject altogether. I feel this is a really important subject given the growth of the autistic community. Can you please take a moment and talk about your perspective on that?
Well, fundamentally, Steve, the root of it has to be a system that's a healthcare system and a mental health care system that's working for everybody. And if we have universal health care or single payer or expanded Medicare for all, whatever label you want to give it today, then we need to have policies in place that cover the social service part of healthcare. It's not just the part where someone walks into a physician and gets something looked at. So absolutely, in my mind, the kinds of services that we're talking about that would encompass universal healthcare, it means all those things that you're talking about, the social side of it as well as the actual medical part of it, the educational part of it. You have some unique challenges there with autism that require a lot of layers to be there and be functioning. But autism isn't the only one either.
No,
right?
It's not. Yes, you're right.
Right. So here again, in some respects, we need a broad brush approach to that condition and many others, but it also has to be sensitive enough to be able to address the specifics of every situation. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge even in the best of circumstances, because we don't want to have a situation where the system is self-promoting itself rather than doing the healing and providing the service, right?
Right. Well, you think about paid family and medical leave. This is something that Bernie Sanders campaigned on. This is something that, many, even Donald Trump, ironically, talked about this. I'm sure his would not be one that we would support necessarily, but hey, any progress at this point in this regard. But paid family and medical leave is something that I feel is not spoken of nearly enough. And it's the kind of situation that allows people to have the flexibility to do what is important. We don't go to work because we love our jobs necessarily. We go to work because we have to feed our families. We have to pay for our mortgages, pay our electric bill, pay whatever. So I guess my question to you is, what is your stance on paid family and medical leave, and where do you think the most opportunity to leverage that is? Do you see that as something that most Americans would support?
Well, recently we were fortunate here in Massachusetts that paid family leave actually did pass here at the state level. And so that, and I was a vocal advocate for that. It was actually tied to a number of other bills that included a raise to a $15 minimum wage, but that is spread out over a number of years. And I confess now, I want to say the 15 didn't actually become into law, I think, until 2023, but it's a progressive hike. But tied into that bill, there was something that I didn't like, which was they got rid of time and a half on Sundays and holidays, which I thought was a mistake. But in the bill, they do have paid family leave, and I'm certainly a strong supporter of that, because we need to work to live, not live to work. And I think too many people have forgotten that, and we're in a situation again where we've got this huge inequality of income going on in the country right now that's created a situation where people are clinging on and really scratching the surface here, trying to hang on. So yes, I absolutely would be a proponent of paid family leave in the U.S. Congress.
That's fantastic. All right, so Bill, one of the next pieces that I want to kind of address here is, going back to, well, I guess it's a couple of years back, you had the Dakota Access Pipeline. We got a lot of attention. You saw Indigenous people garnering lots of support from all over the country, many progressives, including folks like Tulsi, Jill Stein, made it out there. Josh Fox, others, many regular people felt compelled to go out there and fight for indigenous rights.
Right.
What is your position on indigenous rights? And then I want to dovetail into what I consider to be one of the more pressing issues given the Trump administration's rather disgusting position on immigration. I'd like to talk about both indigenous rights and the role of immigration within the United States. Go for it.
Okay. Well, it's unfortunate reality. Our Native Americans or First Americans or First Nation peoples here, unfortunately, have they've endured genocide here for a very long time, and their lands have been taken away from them, and they've been put into smaller and smaller corners of the country unjustly, and at some point, I feel strongly that it needs to stop. I feel strongly that indigenous rights need to be honored, and I am appalled to see when they are not. And there's a lot of issues in the tribal communities with addiction at a higher percentage rate than the greater population, and oftentimes they don't have access to the little help that people have that are not part of those communities. So they need to be attended to. There needs to be fairness. Their lands need to be protected, and I would work to continue to try and protect that as best as possible and secure those lands for future generations. With regards to ICE, I have openly stated, in fact, it's in a flyer that we hand out, that I would promote the abolishment of ICE. And it's only been around for 13 years, and we didn't need it before. We certainly don't need it now. I don't believe that we're serving the best interests of America or Americans when we're going into communities, homes, and jobs and yanking people out out of those neighborhoods. So I'm for keeping the enforcement side of the the goods that come into the country.
Sure.
But not the immigration part of it.
So I guess another question here is, and I'm actually going to throw something at you that I believe is a truth, and get your perspective on it. One of the things that is really difficult, coming from a very conservative area where people were, there was a great disparity of wealth, and now living in central Pennsylvania, where there's an incredibly conservative, lower middle class white America that has been left behind as well. Much of what their fears are with immigrants comes down to this belief that, we got to take care of ours. How can we take care of these immigrants when we can't take care of our own? It's a great question, because we have allowed neoliberalism to create a false scarcity narrative that pits one another against, pits each other against each other, right?
Yeah.
So, naturally, we've already got enough strife and hatred within the U.S. with the people that are already here. So when individuals try and come into this country, they are already met with that feeling regardless. It's a very easy position to sell to these individuals, because they've been left behind. They don't have dental care. They don't have health care. They see their paychecks dwindling because of various reasons, and they see, basically they're getting left behind. It's not the immigrants' fault. And I want to say that the job guarantee and things like that eliminate the scarcity narrative for these individuals, because now all of a sudden what they've done is they've not only pumped money into the economy, but they've also taken away the fear of destitution, and they've given everybody a place to land. Do you see the job guarantee and things of that variety being something that offsets some of the hatred that we see prevalent in America today? Or do you feel that what is your stance? Let me not lead you. What is your stance on that?
Sure. So I see the job guarantee as having a multifold impact there. Absolutely. I have said openly that this whole immigration thing is really scapegoating, right? It's really what you're talking about. It's people are fearing for their own situation, their own livelihood, their ability to take care of their own families, and the undocumented immigrants have now become a target of that fear, that anger, that frustration, and it's unfortunate. And if everyone was making a good living, we wouldn't be looking at someone else's plate, if you will, right? Because you're content with where you are, and you're not saying, "Oh, look at that guy over there. He's doing my job." Well, I would challenge anyone that has said that is saying that the immigrants are the problem here with jobs. I would challenge anyone to come forward and say, "I lost my job because of this particular immigrant, undocumented." It's not true. That's not the jobs normally that the undocumented immigrants are actually taking. And yes, the federal jobs guarantee would provide that sense of wholeness, if you will, that people will not feel like they're in competition. And in addition to that, one of the things I just attended last week, a Coalition for Social Justice seminar that was very enlightening. And I mentioned the federal jobs guarantee as a stepping stone for people that are coming out of incarceration, and how much that would be an empowerment for those people, and how it could handle so much of that. And again, that's another way that we can use that federal job guarantee to make things better for so many people.
All right, so we are coming up fast on the hour here, sir. And what I would like to be able to do is give you a moment to close this out. I think that this was a great interview. It was a nice conversation. I think that you have a lot of answers that interested me, and I think that based on the commentary coming through, that a lot of people were very interested as well. So, what's your closing remarks here?
Thanks, Steve. At the end of the day, we've got to decide what it is we want to do here with our own future and America's future and the future of our kids. And, Einstein, who was a democratic socialist himself, once was quoted as saying that you can't fix a problem from the same level of thinking that created it. And yet, every time we go back to the polls, Americans seem to a high degree, go back and vote for the same incumbents, the same politicians at the state, local, federal level, thinking that there's going to be a different outcome. And if you look around, we know that that does not work. If it worked, we would already have universal health care. We would already have many of the things that we already talked about tonight. So it's time to really take our future seriously and look at the fact that we know the direction we're heading in environmentally, economically, socially is unsustainable. And in 7 days, voters here in the Massachusetts 9th District will have an opportunity to really voice their choice for change. And I hope that they will realize the huge differences between the platform that I'm proposing versus the incumbent. And I encourage everyone to come out and vote. And I appreciate the opportunity, Steve, and I appreciate the folks that came to listen today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill, and I wish you well. Folks, Bill Cimbrelo, congressional candidate for Massachusetts, and I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progressives. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.